former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
And we got an interesting guest today. His name is Dan Wos. He's from Saratoga County, New York. He's written 3 editions of a book called Good Gun, Bad Guy. And it talks about more so about the politics of how they try to minimize and cancel those people who support and stick up for the Second Amendment. Like all the guests I have on the program, this is really a place to hear different opinions and for you to make your own decisions on whether to adopt or reject, adopt some and reject others of the views of my guests. It's a great thing, the First Amendment. It allows us to speak up and offer our opinions. I don't necessarily agree with all the views of the guests, but I do agree they have an absolute right to present their views for the listeners. So thanks for listening. And now the interview with Dan. This is the Rich Giardino Show. I'm Rich Giardino. We're produced in Fulton County, New York. Fulton County, New York is a place where we still stand for the pledge and kneel to pray. Our guest today is Dan Wos. Dan is with us from Saratoga County. And Dan is a big Second Amendment supporter and a supporter of the Constitution. He's written several books on Good Gun, Bad Guy. And we're going to talk a little bit about how he got into that. And he's nationally renowned in the area. He's spoken at many national NRA events. He's been on radio, television, Newsmax, Fox News. I've been on with Sean Hannity. And what fascinated me most and what drew me to invite Dan as our guest is that Dan doesn't only defend the Constitution and the Second Amendment, but he explains what the other side, the anti-gunners, the anti-Second Amendment people use to minimize your arguments and minimize you as a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about key words that are used to trigger and the whole methodology and mindset, because it's not by accident of how they oppose your right to possess firearms. So Dan, tell us a little bit about how you got into this and a little bit about your history before we go into the books.
Sheriff Rich, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here, and there is so much to talk about when we're talking about the Second Amendment and when we're talking about the anti-gunners and their mission to destroy our God-given right. I could briefly, I'll give you some bullet points on how I got involved. I was in, my wife and I were in a bit of a situation coming out of a late night movie one night at Crossgates Theater. And it was that moment that, and I was somewhat anti-gun at the time. It was a long time ago, but it was that moment when I realized that, you know, the most important thing and my biggest responsibility is to be able to protect myself, my wife, and, you know, and my son. So it was that night that kind of turned everything around. Every once in a while we have these moments of clarity, you know, these moments of awareness. And I realized that I had been thinking about guns all wrong. I had fallen prey to a lot of the anti-gun rhetoric and propaganda and all the nonsense that we hear, you know, all the gun violence and assault weapon and weapons of war, ghost gun, all the scary stuff. And I believed that, well, more gun regulations will stop the bad guys. It was until that night that I realized that no, it's more important for me to be able to protect myself, exercise my God-given right, the Second Amendment that our founding fathers recognized. And it was that night that changed everything. So I started looking into and I started exploring and researching the anti-gun side and how was it that they're so crafty and so good at convincing people to fear guns, and not only fear guns, but hate gun owners. So fear guns, it's this irrational fear because of the propaganda and the scare tactics that they use, but it's also a hatred toward gun owners for some reason. It's like we're almost positioned as the bad guys because we want to exercise our rights. They want to protect our family. So it was that night that really changed everything for me. I started researching. I wrote an article. It took off, turned into the first chapter of my first book, Good Gun, Bad Guy. And from then on, it was TV and radio and national public speaking events and all sorts of stuff. And I'm still doing all that stuff, constantly writing for Ammo Land News, trying to expose the radical anti-gun political left.
Let me just show your book, Good Gun, Bad Guy. And again, as soon as you say something like that, oh my gosh, look, they're promoting gun violence or guns. And one of the things I like about having you on is because you have a unique perspective. And it's not only, hey, I'm pro Second Amendment, these are your rights. This is how they're trying to steal your rights and prevent you from exercising your rights. And I ask our listeners, please like, share this, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble, and any of these other platforms. That's the only way we get our message out, and the only way that law-abiding citizens have of being informed so they can protect themselves. One thing that always amazed me, Dan, I am 65 years old. I grew up at a time when at our high school, there were shotguns and rifles in pickup trucks on gun racks in unlocked cars. Guys would bring their guns into school. They'd work on them in a shop class. They would go hunting in the morning, hunting in the afternoon during hunting season. And we didn't have this crime violence. Columbine is what really set it off. There had been a couple other school shootings before that, and there had been other violence. But Columbine is what kind of started things rolling. But before that, I mean, we had, they say the gun culture. We had a gun culture in rural areas and in rural states. I can't speak for the cities, but around our communities in upstate New York and other states I've been to, people tell me the same thing. Geez, when I was in high school, we'd bring our guns to school and we would be on shooting teams at the school, and we would be in ROTC, and it was a safe environment. So let's talk about some of the words that, quote unquote, and I don't like talking in generalities, but that they use, the anti-gunners use. Tell us why they picked those words and how effective they have been, because we don't combat those situations.
Well, there are a lot of them. I can give you a couple. The term weapons of war was one that I noticed early on with Obama and Hillary Clinton. They were really using and pushing that term a lot. Weapons of war is this term designed to scare Sally's soccer mom in the cul-de-sac. Mm-hmm. She doesn't know what a weapon of war is. It sounds scary to her and to a lot of people who are just uninformed and don't get it. So they think that these weapons of war, whatever that is to them, are lurking around the neighborhood, So she'll do anything to stop this fear and make it go away. And that's the idea behind most legislation, is to create enough fear in the public to garner their support. So weapons of war was a big one. There's the ghost gun. Ghost gun is hysterical to me, because what's scarier than ghosts? So they're very smart and clever. They know how to take these words and put them together. And ghost gun came from, I should say, they used as the culprit, they used the 3D printed gun. And they put out this campaign, this fear campaign, to talk about everybody's now printing 3D guns at their kitchen tables, and these 3D printed guns are everywhere. They're ghost guns. Well, really, they're guns that just don't have a serial number and can't be tracked and traced. Now, I'm not sure how you in law enforcement feel about this, but to me, as a gun owner, as a law-abiding citizen, I don't remember the Constitution saying the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, as long as there's a serial number where that gun can be traced back to your front door. To me, that sounds like a violation of the Second Amendment. But ghost gun was that term that would get everybody on board to support serialization, which ultimately leads to registration. And we're seeing registration right now in New York State, when Kathy Hochul took the firearm and ammunition background check system and brought it in-house to the state police. Now, when it was with the NICS system, in the federal NICS system, gun owners had the protection of anonymity, where we're not supposed to be put on a list. But that's not available to us anymore now that it's at the state police. So ghost gun, serialization, registration, all that stuff, there's a purpose for that. We don't like it as law-abiding citizens. It's nobody's business. And then let me get to the big one first, if we got another minute on this, because
I'd like to discuss. I want people to hear how effective they are, because I've always felt that the conservative Republicans are lame when it comes to using language. For example, immigrants, they're not immigrants, they're illegal immigrants,
Right,
and no one has a problem with people immigrating to our country following the right things, but the Republicans always make it sound like they're bashing people who want to come to our beautiful country for great things. No, they're saying come the right way, period.
They're calling them, they're calling them now newcomers.
Yes, newcomers. But go ahead, Dan, because there's
so the big daddy term of them all is gun violence. Everybody, and people use this term gun violence. It drives me crazy. It sends shivers up my back, because I know there's no such thing. There's no such thing as gun violence. Gun violence is a fake term. What they've done is they've taken the word gun, which is an inanimate object. Anybody, I'm sure you have a vision when I say the word gun, something pops into your head. I happen to envision a 1911 for some reason. That's what a gun looks like to me. Some people might envision a shotgun or an AR-15, whatever it is. We all have our own internal representation of what gun is. We also have our own internal representation of what violence is. I can't tell you what violence looks like to you. I know what it looks like to me. So what they've done is they've successfully taken two words that shouldn't go together and put them together so you can envision a gun being violent. Guns can't be violent. There's no such thing as gun violence. It just doesn't exist. What we're really talking about is human violence, but they don't want to talk about human violence, because a lot of times human violence, if we trace down the effects of human violence, it would come to a lot of failed, primarily Democrat policies, bail reform, early release, all sorts of stuff. But they use the term gun violence to scare people into thinking that the gun is acting on its own. And groups like Moms Demand Action, Everytown, Gifford's Group, they literally say guns will shoot by themselves.
They believe
faulty guns will shoot by themselves. So they're trying to create this narrative with the term gun violence, that guns can act on their own. It's simply not true. It's human violence we're really talking about.
What I'm scanning for is, I go to the Gun Violence Project, which keeps track of how many gun deaths there are in this country. And what's very fascinating, and I had an email with one of the directors, because the Gun Violence Project keeps track of intentional homicides, accidental shootings, suicides, and what they ended up in, school shootings, police shootings. They keep it pretty fairly accurate, right? So what they did in 2024 is they've stopped reporting on suicides by gun. And I emailed them, I says, time out. I said 50% of the gun deaths and injuries in this country are by suicide. And I said, and you have taken that off of the table, giving a misleading statistic. And they said, well, we're trying to verify our facts, because sometimes an accident is a suicide, sometimes, and I invited one of them to come on and speak to me. They haven't gotten back to me. But the point is very simple. I always cited the Gun Violence Project because they're up to the date. You put it in and it tells you. And what's amazing to me, and people don't know this, there's over 350 million people in this country. There's 350 million firearms, handguns, rifles, shotguns.
Those are the ones we know about.
Yeah, right. The ones we know about. And the bottom line is, every year there's probably between 40 and 50 or 60,000 deaths and another 150,000 injuries. And 50% of the deaths and injuries are suicide. Right. By gun. And that's why, I'm not a big fan of red flag laws, but having been threatened to be shot more than once, and the mental health component, I think appropriately imposed red flag laws can save lives, especially the mental health who would hurt themselves. So that's another conversation. But I wanted to follow up with you, because the statistics tell us that 50% of those people who die by firearms in this country die by suicide.
Yes.
And they never, you know what they don't tell us that I can't find anywhere? They never tell you how many of the gun deaths are with illegal guns or someone who should not possess a gun. When I say illegal guns, I mean firearms that are illegally possessed. That's the right phrase, I should say.
Well, I do a lot of work with Gun Owners of America at the national level, and what we've learned is that the vast majority of crime committed with guns are either stolen guns or they're not legally owned. So what happens is we look at these laws and we say, well, these laws don't affect the bad guys because they're going around the laws. They're stealing guns. They're using community guns out in the cities. They're robbing gun shops and doing whatever they're doing to get them. But they don't pay any attention to the laws. They're not paying attention to magazine capacity. They're not paying attention to gun-free zones. They're not paying attention to any of it. We are, because we're good people and we don't want to get arrested. So it clearly shows that the laws are designed for us. And I believe that the laws are created for the and primarily created by Democrats, by left-wingers, especially in New York State. We have a Democrat supermajority here in this state.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the gun laws are created not for the criminals, but for their political opposition, the good guys, the patriots.
Yeah,
and,
most people. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but most people follow the laws. Our gun owners follow the laws, lawfully possessed. And here's how I know that. As a judge, I was a licensing officer. And in my 18 and a half years as a judge, every year I would have 15 to 20 suspensions. Most of the suspensions of people who had pistol permits were because they had a DWI or a larceny or another incident. If they had a family court order of protection, there would be a suspension. Now, of every year of those who I suspended or revoked, less than 1 or 2 would use their lawfully possessed firearm in a crime. Let me say that. The ones who lawfully possessed handguns, they were the least likely to use their lawfully possessed firearms in a crime. So in 18 years, I probably revoked or suspended less than 24 people who actually used a lawfully possessed firearm. And in our community, we have 14,000 firearm pistol permittees in my county. Before we go on with the next segment, I just want to remind people, listen, join our dialogue, listen to our conversation, share, like, and please subscribe to the Rich Giardino Show, whether it be on Apple, YouTube, Spotify. I say Ramble, but I guess it's Rumble or whatever, and any other platform that you listen to your programs. We're here with Dan Wos, who's written several books and also spoken extensively across the country on your Second Amendment rights. Dan, what is the answer? What can we tell people that we agree is a solution? Because I think part of the dialogue is not only saying, hey, we know that you have a false narrative. We agree. Here's some of the things that if the laws that are there were enforced, that would help. But what are some of the things, what are some of the laws that you've researched and looked at that actually may make a difference in some of the incidents that we deal with?
With respect to what? Make a solution for what?
For solutions for like when we look at the profiles of the school shooters, we find that mental health is a big problem.
Okay.
So I'm asking you, I know that having researched all these, you certainly have to feel that if certain laws were actually enforced against the people who would use a gun illegally, that would make a difference. So that's in general terms I'm talking.
Well, generally speaking, when I look at preserving life, I look at gun laws and I see them as a deterrent to that. And I'll explain why. Gun-free zones, probably the most dangerous place to be. I don't ever want to be in a gun-free zone. It feels uncomfortable to me because I know that people are unarmed and helpless.
Let me ask you a question. I love that because I always use gun-free zones. I say, find me someone who was going to go shoot up an area and they saw the sign that said gun-free zones and they said, oh, it's a gun-free zone. I'm not going to go shoot up the area.
Right. Well, that's
that person does not exist.
Exactly. That's the point. And so when you say what are the solutions, first of all, we talk about mental health, and I get asked this question all the time. What are the solutions? You know, what do you plan? What would you do, Dan, to fix the problems of, you know, crazy people getting guns or whatever? My answer to that question is always, when did it become the responsibility of the gun owner to solve the ills of the world? I didn't create mental health issues. I'm certainly not equipped to fix them. That's the work of a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And if they can't be helped, it's expected in this society that if they're a violent criminal, they should be in jail. So for me, you know, it seems like the implication is always, what gun laws would you approve of or whatever? I don't approve of any of them. I shouldn't have to be subjected to gun restrictions because of other people. If they're bad enough and dangerous enough to lose their God-given right to gun ownership and self-defense, wouldn't we assume that that person is bad enough and should be in jail? If not, why are they out? That's a question that always leads to the legal system. So I think if we can fix some of those issues in the legal system, that would be a step in the right direction. Morality is obviously another thing that needs to be fixed in this country. A value for life, and I think kids growing up now, a lot of them don't have a value for life. But let me get to one more thing, Sheriff, because I wanted to talk about the gun-free zones a little bit more. Yep. People may not realize this, but in 1990, Joe Biden introduced a thing called the Crime Control Act. In the Crime Control Act was the Gun-Free School Zones Act, which essentially removed firearms from school campuses. Now, schools were allowed to appoint certain people to protect the schools, and we all know that. We had an issue up in Saratoga where they wanted to take the security away for some reason. I never understand that. But anyway, but what happened is it got so demonized that really there was no protection now in schools. Me as a father walking in to get my son, I couldn't have my handgun on me. I don't understand why. I'm only there to protect people. I would only use it for good. But ever since Joe Biden introduced that Gun-Free School Zones Act, school killings since then have doubled, and they increase at twice the rate of increase every 10 years because people are sitting ducks. So one thing I would do is get rid of the gun-free zones, especially the gun-free school zones, and either put good people like you in the sheriff's department or the police department, either put good people there to protect the kids at all entrances and all possible places strategically, or arm those teachers and faculty who would be inclined to carry a gun. And we get this from the left. Oh, you want to arm everybody. You want to give the cafeteria lady a gun. No, only the people with a concealed carry who would be inclined to carry a gun on a daily basis. These are simple solutions, but the Democrats have changed all that. They removed that possibility. And as a result, children and teachers are getting killed.
Yeah. And when you go to school to become a teacher, or you go to work in a school, you don't go to become a security guard or throw your body in front of a shooter. And one of the things that I agree with is I don't like the publicity every time there's a mass shooting at a school. I think that spurs the mental illness in other kids to want to duplicate it in other people. I wanted to touch back on what I had said before about lawful possessed handguns. The crimes, the times they're used against others, unfortunately, is in domestic violence situations. So domestic violence. So it's a they did one study I read was 1/6 of 1% of pistol permittees would use their gun illegally. And then when you look underneath the numbers, it's usually a domestic violence situation. But if they didn't have a legally possessed firearm, they would have found another means.
There was a woman named Carol Bound in New Jersey, and she had applied and she had waited, I think it was probably 90 days or something. They delayed and delayed and delayed. and she couldn't get her pistol permit. Now, she already had protection orders against her or her boyfriend, and there were several calls to the police department that she was in danger, several calls to the house and stuff. So they knew, the police department, her county knew that she was in danger, and they delayed and delayed and delayed in giving her government issued permission slip. She died. He killed her. He stabbed her to death. So I understand the domestic violence problem. What I would say as a solution is make sure everybody can protect themselves, because that would stop. That would stop in an instant. And if there is somebody who's a violent actor, a domestic partner who's violent and who's shown violence and who's proven to be violent, why aren't they in jail? This is the question I don't, and you can probably answer this better because you're closer to that. Why aren't they in jail? I mean, what's going on with our legal system that's keeping these violent people on the streets? And if they haven't committed a crime yet, then why should they be restricted?
It's interesting because we always talk about orders of protection, and they're pieces of paper. And if somebody's intent on hurting you or not following them, the piece of paper isn't going to make them follow the law. They don't follow the fact that they're beating their wife or significant other is an indication that they don't follow society's laws. So handing them a piece of paper that says, hey, don't do this anymore, or bringing them in and saying, here's an appearance ticket, you're stalking, stop stalking, doesn't send the right message at all to these individuals. I agree with you. Hey, on a side note, tell us a little bit about the guitar and the guns offset here. It's kind of neat background.
I've got some old muzzle loaders back there. The bottom one I restored. I don't know if you can see it very well, but I just decorative stuff there. As far as the guitar goes, I've been a guitar player since I was able to pick one up. I toured in bands in the 90s, and I've been playing guitar forever. So that's just a big, huge part of my life. A lot of people as a matter of fact, I used to play a lot in your neck of the woods over there on Sacandaga Lake. I used to play all those bars on the lake. And
beautiful.
So I'm a long-time guitar player.
Hey, Dan, we're going to list a lot of how to reach you, how to view and find your information on our social media. But where's the easiest place to find you if people want to do it? Because I have a hard time pronouncing your name, and it's spelled very simply. So go ahead and tell us.
Well, you're not the only. The name is Dan Wos. It's you can find me at goodgunbadguy.com. goodgunbadguy.com. It's a 3-book series. You can see it over my shoulder. And you can also check out my web show called The Loaded Mic, and that's at loadedmic.com. MIC, like microphone. We have a great show we do. And as a matter of fact, Sheriff Rich, we're going to have you on the show one day.
Love to.
We would love to have you on. It's a heavy Second Amendment stuff, but we get into politics and topics of the day. We goof around. We have a blast. It's a lot of fun. And so loadedmic.com or goodgunbadguy.com. You can also catch my articles at Ammoland News. I write an article for them about every week. I give them a new article. So
it's a lot to do. Hey, thank you for all you do to educate the public on really what the other side is trying to undercut and take our rights away. And again, thanks for joining us. I know your time is valuable. I want to ask everybody, listen, share this conversation, like the Giardino Show, and please subscribe and have your friends do the same, whether it's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Rumble, or any other platform that does the podcasts. And thanks again to our guest, Dan Wos. And please pick up his book, go online, read some of his articles, and check him out on the Live Mic. The Live Mic?
Loaded Mic.
Loaded Mic. There you go. And I don't even drink. Sheriff, Loaded Mic, and I don't even drink.
Thanks for having me on the show, Sheriff. And you keep up the great work, too. You're doing a fantastic job. And everybody in your county and surrounding counties appreciates you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind words. We're with Dan Wos. We just finished our interview, thanking Dan for joining us and sharing his knowledge, his time, and his expertise on the Second Amendment, protecting you and your rights and the Constitution. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the program. In a few minutes, we'll start with Scripps interview that we just recently had, actually within 15 minutes of the verdict in President Trump's trial. I try to offer some insights on procedural matters as to what happens next. What's a pre-sentence report? What's sentencing? What's a motion to set aside the verdict? And possible appealable grounds. So please stick around and listen to that conversation.
I want to bring in now former New York State Judge and Prosecutor Rich Giardino. Rich, for viewers who are just joining us, where do we go from here? What happens next?
So procedurally, what happens is the defense attorneys for President Trump will make a motion to set aside the verdict. It's a pro forma motion. They'll file papers. They'll get the transcript from the trial, and the DA will respond. The court will then review it prior to sentencing. Generally, the court will deny such a motion, and the court's rulings up until now indicate to me that he would deny a motion to set aside the verdict as not based on the facts of the law. Then he will be sentenced by the court. There will be, as your other guest had said, a pre-sentence investigation through probation. Again, as a judge, we look at the facts and circumstances, and we look at the past record or lack of record, in this case of President Trump. While there's prison sentences of a max of 1/3 to 4, this defendant, Mr. President Trump, has no prior criminal record. This is not something that normally one would think would end up in a prison sentence. This is something that if he does sentence him would probably be probation. It's interesting, the timing. The timing is before the convention, shortly before the convention. So from after the sentence, the president's lawyers will seek a stay of the imposition or the execution of the sentence, either by Judge Merchan or by an appellate court. Generally, appellate courts, in a case of this nature, it's a nonviolent felony. It's a very unusual case. There's a lot of appealable arguments and issues. I see that either the appellate court or the sentencing judge would issue the stay of execution of the sentence, and the president will be out to campaign while an appeal progresses. That's the legal procedural end. There's also the political side of this, and there's also the disappointment in the criminal justice system that's occurred.
How much room is there for Judge Merchan if he's upset about what former President Trump said about him to factor that into what he decides the sentence to be?
He's not supposed to take personal views or opinions and factor those in, but there's initially, even though it was only $35 donation, he donated to President Biden 4 years ago, and it's the appearance in New York of impropriety. Even if he is not corrupted by the $35 donation, he also donated to anti-Republican organizations. So for those reasons, he should have really stepped aside in the beginning and recused himself. So that's going to be an appealable issue. I think that he was intent on this case because it will be the biggest case of his career ever. He will not get another case of this nature with this publicity. And so I just hope that he plays it down the middle. So far, the rulings I saw and some of the issues raised, I don't think that he was being fair and impartial to Mr. Trump in this case.
Yeah, Rich, give us your take. I mean, how was the performance of the defense team? Obviously, we know the jury handed down this verdict, but just given what you've seen over the past few weeks, I'm just curious to get your take.
Well, here's what people have to understand. The defense has no burden whatsoever. I do think that the judge should not have precluded testimony about some of the things that Cohen had said to others, and he should have allowed an expert to testify about how the federal government viewed these same set of facts. That's very important, and you could argue that those are expert witnesses. So I think the defense team did what they should have done. I think that the prosecution overstepped the bounds. First of all, they used a tape-recorded conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen was his lawyer. So unless it's a new crime, Mr. Cohen's tape should not have been allowed. It should have been confidential by attorney-client privilege, and only Mr. Trump can release that privilege. I already mentioned Judge Merchan's donation. I've had friends say, well, it's only $35. I don't care. It shows that he has a predisposition against Mr. Trump and for Mr. I think that the defense bar in the state of New York and the defense bar across the country kind of disappointed me. I thought that they should have been louder and spoke out more than a few defense attorneys and said, look, this is wrong. They know that no other defendant has been charged or would be charged under these theories where they take a misdemeanor and elevate it to a felony based on a federal charge. It's just a local prosecutor really should not have been involved in something like this. I think the age of the case when the incident allegedly occurred, and also when the paperwork was filed, it just reeks of politics. And I think from a political standpoint, Alvin Bragg succeeded in what he wanted to do. He tied up President Trump for 6 weeks, and he muddied him up so that now he is a convicted felon at this point, and it'll go up on appeal. I do think ultimately, whether it's the courts in New York or it goes up to the federal court from there, from the Court of Appeals, I think President Trump will have the case reversed, and they will not proceed further.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.